Night did not easily fall on Rome's northern borders. When evening came, the air outside became very heavy. The sky was silent as snow, ... but as heavy as death. That night, as the door of the war tent swayed gently, Marcus Aurelius opened his notebook, but did not write. He simply waited and began to think in silence. Because on some nights, even an emperor cannot find the words. Because he did not actually find the words. They appeared when they needed to be written. There are 7 dark nights you will never see in the pages of Meditations. No book writes about these 7 dark nights. No book would even want to put them into words. These nights are not those of a philosopher. They are the moments when a human being breaks down. They are the times when a human being falls into the void and searches for a way out. He commanded Rome's most disciplined soldiers. Rome's most flawless, most perfect, most powerful armies were under his command. With a single order from him, they would destroy one state and build another. But some nights came when Marcus, who commanded Rome's most powerful armies, could not cope with his own mind. He couldn't control it. He didn't have the power. He was a wise man, and he was human. From outside, the screams of barbarians could be heard. Chaos reigned everywhere. The place had turned into a battlefield. The snorting of horses, the moans of wounded soldiers, the heavy breathing carried by the plague. Everything combined to make a single sound, the fall. As Marcus tried to wipe the blood from between his fingers, he couldn't stop his breath from trembling. He couldn't muster the strength. He couldn't control himself. Did this blood belong to an enemy, a soldier, or his own soul? No one knew. It was almost impossible to know. But there was one thing he knew. Blood had touched his hand. That night, he wrote only one sentence in his notebook. Tonight, I forgot how to be human. Tonight, I lost myself. And now, I confront you with the first of those 7 nights. The battlefield had calmed down in the late afternoon. Silence enveloped the surroundings. As the sun set, everything was painted orange. Even the dead seemed peaceful. But when night fell, the truth emerged. Even the wind didn't dare to blow. It was as if even the wind was afraid. That night, 3 soldiers were brought to Marcus' tent. Suspected plague. They were all trembling. They couldn't control themselves. One breathed his last right before their eyes. A silent, short, gasping breath. They looked as if they were waiting for death. Marcus bowed his head, not as an emperor, but as a human being. He looked at them as a wise man. At that moment, he understood. A sword can kill a barbarian, but an invisible disease can bring an empire to its knees. That disease, which overthrows mighty armies, which destroys mighty empires. A sword wound can heal. An arrow wound can be bandaged. But disease, yes, no one had the power to overcome that. That night, he could not write anything in Meditations, because sometimes words cannot bear the weight of pain. Only silence and patience bore this pain. These 2 were the cure for all troubles, all sorrows. But it was a very difficult cure. He knelt down and fell silent. While Rome's loudest commanders barked orders outside, there was only one thing in Marcus's tent: silence. But this silence was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a slowly growing fear. Marcus was not a Stoic at that moment. He was not an emperor either. He was just a man trying to breathe in the midst of darkness. And he whispered to himself, "Today, my heart fought a battle that even my mind could not control. This was only the first night, and every night would be darker than the last." When night fell, the army camp was divided in 2. Outside, the murmur of soldiers around their fires. Inside, in Marcus Aurelius' tent, the silent fire of thoughts. The silent screens of his thoughts dominated Marcus. But that night, even the fires burned differently. They burned heavier than ever before. The color of the flames had faded, as if they were tired from carrying the weight of war. They seemed to have exhausted all their strength. As Marcus returned to his tent, after a long meeting with the generals, a feeling passed through him. There will be no peace tonight. He was right. As he approached the tent entrance, 2 soldiers dropped a wounded soldier they had been carrying as if dragging him along the ground. He was young, very young. Perhaps 18, perhaps even younger. His body was covered in blood, but no one who is about to die fears death. They fear only one thing, what they leave behind. Marcus knelt. He was no longer an emperor. He was just a man crouched before a wounded child. The soldier's lips trembled. His voice was almost inaudible, but that whisper was deeper than all the noise of war. Sir, I want to go home. This sentence stabbed the emperor in the chest like a dagger. It shook him instantly. Marcus had seen many wars. He had suffered many losses. No one in Rome possessed his willpower, but even he couldn't bear this, because it wasn't just that child who wanted to go home. That night, everyone wanted to go home. Everyone wanted this moment to pass and to escape this situation. Marcus placed his fingers on the soldier's wrist, a weak, wavering pulse ready to stop. War seemed easy from the outside, but every situation revealed itself when you were in it. A life turning into silence in an instant. That was the most inhuman aspect of war. But Marcus had only one question in his mind. How can I comfort him? The words of a philosopher were useless here. They would have no effect on anyone here, because there was someone here who is about to die, When the fear of death envelops a person, no words make sense to them. Not even the orders of an emperor. Because a person about to die wants not the truth, they want peace. They want to find peace. Because that is what death is like. It brings people peace. Marcus leaned down and whispered to him, "Don't be afraid. You are home." The soldier closed his eyes. That word home was the only word that accompanied death like a brother. But the storm inside Marcus began at that moment. This storm was not about barbarians. It was not about borders, lands, or war tactics. This storm was the unseen side of the burden called leadership. Because that night, Marcus realized this. An emperor drags thousands of soldiers into battle, but each of their deaths is written as a silent debt on the emperor's soul. As the soldier breathed his last, the sound of rain came from outside the tent. It was as if even the sky felt ashamed. Marcus bowed his head. His meditations notebook lay beside him, but he did not reach for it. Some nights you cannot write words. Some nights you cannot even think. You just wait. Not for the storm to pass. You wait for a part of yourself to be reborn. That night, Marcus wrote nothing. He just whispered silently. This war has taken me to the limits of my humanity. And so night 2 ended, not with an emperor, but with a human being's most fragile moment. But the darkest nights were just beginning. The noise of war is always outside. The clang of swords, screams, commands. The Roman army was accustomed to these sounds. But that night, there was no sound of war. Another noise reigned in the camp. There was a sound that penetrated to the deepest part of people's souls. The plague. Because the enemy was not barbarians. The enemy was invisible. The plague had descended on the camp like a silent ghost. It had taken the camp in a death grip, and he had no intention of returning empty-handed. When Marcus Aurelius stood outside his tent and looked into the faces of his soldiers, for the first time he saw not the fear of battle in their eyes, but the scent of death. The plague was an enemy that even war bowed down to. The sword was useless. Courage could not withstand it. And no leader, no philosopher, no emperor could ever be ready for it. That night, a pile of coffins rose in the middle of the camp. Quick graves made of wood, ... Each one carried a story, each one an unfinished life, and the mark of a new wound opened in Marcus's soul. A doctor approached the emperor with trembling hands, not blood on his clothes to spare. "My lord, the numbers are rising. 40 today. Tomorrow it could be 80. Marcus asked only one sentence. "Are any recovering?" The doctor looked away. At that moment, the camp's silence fell upon Marcus. This silence was heavier than the war tent itself, because when the enemy's voice is absent, one is condemned to the voice of their own mind. And that night, Marcus's mind was a battlefield. A muffled cough came from a tent, then another, then several more. The rhythm of the coughs beat like a metronome in Marcus's heart. Death, death. A soldier knelt before Marcus. He wasn't young. He was an experienced centurion. Marcus had known him for years. "Sir, let me return to my family. If I die of the plague, at least let me die at home." An answer rose from within Marcus. "I want to go home to ... But he couldn't say it. An emperor couldn't reveal his vulnerability. His emotions were like the walls of the empire. They must not crack. So he simply bowed his head and replied, "Don't go. We need you." But it was a lie. It was perhaps the only lie Marcus had ever told in his life. What kept him there was not his need for his soldier. What kept him there was the collapse of the order that ruled the camp if hundreds of soldiers made the same demand. That would mean the end of Rome. That night, Marcus felt defeated by his own conscience for the first time. As the night progressed, the wind began to blow through the camp. But the wind did not carry coolness. It carried the scent of death. It carried the fear of death that enveloped the entire body to every soul. It was as if it were acting as a messenger. Every new cough, every silent moan, every shadow whispered a truth to Marcus. Even the emperor can be helpless. The meditation's notebook lay on the table, its blank pages staring at Marcus, as if challenging him. Write if you can. But that night, when Marcus picked up the pen, his hands trembled. He couldn't find the words. Sometimes, philosophy must remain silent in the face of death. Finally, he wrote a single sentence. "Tonight, it's not leadership. Humanity weighs heavily." Then he put down his pen, because if he had continued, the lines would no longer be wisdom, they would be collapse. As the plague spread to every corner of the camp, Marcus sat alone. Not the emperor, a man, an ordinary man breathing amidst fear, exhaustion, and helplessness. That night, no one fought. Everyone waited for the plague to choose its victims. And Marcus understood this. War with barbarians wears a man down. But the invisible enemy ... breaks the spirit. Night 3 ended like this. A night won not by swords, but by silence. There is a night in the war tent that no historian mentions. No book tells of it. No one wanted to remember that night. Because on that night, Marcus Aurelius' greatest enemy was not the barbarians. It was the Roman army itself. The army was at war within itself. The sun had set. The sky had fallen like dark lead over the camp. The soldiers were exhausted from the long war and the plague. Even their footsteps echoed with anger, weariness, and despair. Then, at midnight, a scream rang out. That scream suddenly echoed throughout the entire headquarters. A soldier had stabbed another Roman soldier, one of his own men, like killing his brother. He had done it without mercy. Someone bound by the same oath. How could he kill him? Why? There was no reason. A fight over a piece of bread. Exhaustion. Hunger. Despair. When the emperor emerged from his tent, 2 soldiers were wrestling on the ground. One was gasping for breath. The other was panting. unable to find the words to explain his crime. Soldiers were all around, but no one had separated them. No one had intervened. No one had said stop, because everyone was broken. Marcus watched them, not as an emperor, but as a father, as a teacher, as a refuge, like a teacher showing them the right path. But that night, nothing worked. One of the soldiers looked at Marcus and whispered, "Sir ... no one listens to anyone anymore. No one could tolerate each other anymore." This sentence stabbed Marcus in the heart like a dagger, because for years he had written about self-control, unity, and acting with virtue. But his own army, his own soldiers, had reached a point where they had forgotten his teachings. They had reverted to their old, untrained selves. When he returned to his tent that night, there was an invisible wound on his face, the shattering of his faith. He opened his meditations notebook. The blank pages stared back at him. It was as if even the notebook had asked, "Can human nature truly be trained?" Marcus picked up his pen, but his hand trembled. Even in the darkest nights of war, his words had been powerful. But this time, for the first time, he was filled with a disappointment he couldn't even explain to himself. From outside the tent came the soldiers' conversations, their whispers. Some talked of dying, some of fleeing, some of blaming the emperor. Marcus listened. Every word added a new burden to his shoulders. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. He stepped out of his tent and sat down by the campfire. The soldiers fell silent when they saw him. But even in that silence, Marcus couldn't find what he was looking for. Even that silence had been shattered. A sentence kept running through his mind. "I taught people virtue. But as human nature rotted in the hunger of war, who listened to me?" That night, Marcus wrote for the first time. Today, Rome's enemy was not the barbarians. Today, Rome's enemy ... was Rome itself. As he wrote this sentence, his pen broke. But what truly broke was not the pen, but the faith within him. That night, Marcus understood. War is not against an external enemy. War is against the darkness within man. And sometimes, even the most loyal soldier can surrender to that darkness. When he returned to his tent, he sat for a while. What did he think? What did he feel? No one will ever know. But he added this line to his notebook. "Today I did not fight. I only came to know man, and that hurt more than fighting." Night 4 ended like this. A night when an emperor's faith in his own army and in human nature was shaken. That night, the door of the war tent opened, not with the wind, ... but with death. It had rained all day, and the ground was stained not with mud, but with blood. The plague roamed the camp like a silent wolf, touching the soldiers one by one. Each touch took a life, without a sound, without a trace. When night fell, a murmur spread through the camp. The darkness felt like a heavy stone pressing on their chests. No one dared to breathe. And then, a stretcher was brought before Marcus Aurelius. Lying on it was one of his most loyal commanders. A warrior who had fought barbarians for years, who had returned from death countless times. But this time, the enemy was not a sword. It was a microbe, a breath, a touch. The commander's face was pale, his eyes sunken. The smell of death hung around him like a misty fog. Marcus bent down. He listened to him. He watched him. The commander whispered, struggling to breathe, "My lord ... this time my armor failed to protect me." This sentence burned Marcus' heart, because in that moment he realized death chooses the man inside the armor, not the armor itself. A flicker of fear appeared in the emperor's eyes. A brief, sharp, intense fear. Because that day, 3 tents away from the camp ... the plague was spreading like wildfire, and Marcus could be its next target. The doctors arrived. The tent filled with panic, whispers, and helplessness. The commander couldn't breathe. Then suddenly, ... he coughed up blood. It spread across the ground. One of the doctors looked at Marcus. Sir, ... you may be carrying it too. You need to get yourself checked. These words were the most blatant threat an emperor could hear. Even an enemy's sword couldn't speak so directly, because you can understand the true intent of an enemy's sword when it swings at you. At that moment, Marcus's face turned ashen. He wasn't a man who thought he was immortal. He was a man who had forgotten he was mortal. He did not leave his tent. He bowed his head and sat down in a chair. He placed his hand on the table and looked. His fingers were trembling. That hand that never trembled on the battlefield, it shuddered in the face of death's silent breath. Like everyone else, he was frightened by that sound. But he had trained himself in this matter. He always lived knowing he would die, because that was what being Stoic meant. Then he opened his meditations notebook. But this time, he wrote not as a wise philosopher. He wrote as a man afraid of dying. Today, I lost not my body, but my courage. The page was wet with this sentence, because rain was seeping into the tent ... or those drops were falling from his eyes. No one knew. The howl of the wind came from outside. A tent collapsed. Soldiers shouted. Another soldier fell to the ground. Death was walking through the camp. Marcus thought for a moment. What if this is my last night? What if meditations ends here? What if tomorrow I return not to Rome ... but to the earth? Being emperor did not stop death. The crown did not recognize the virus. Power did not care about the bacteria. That night, Marcus felt death's breath in his tent. At one point, his breathing became shallow. His hand went to his chest. His heartbeat quickened. The doctors rushed in. They held his hand. They took his temperature. They checked his pulse. One doctor shouted in panic, "Your Majesty, you may have symptoms too." The tent suddenly turned ice cold. Death stood in the middle of the tent, staring into Marcus's eyes. At that moment, the emperor added this line to his journal. "Today I did not rule Rome. Today I thought about my own end. And for the first time in a long while, I was afraid. Fear, the greatest enemy of a Stoic." But Marcus tasted fear that night, alone, in silence, in darkness, in the howling wind. The night dragged on until morning. When Marcus closed his eyes, he heard only one thing. Today, I too could die. And so night 5 ended. The night an emperor dug his own grave in his mind for the first time. As night fell, the war tent weighed down on Marcus Aurelius like a coffin closing over him. The rain that had fallen all day had finally stopped. Yet the stench of death still lingered in the center of the camp. Exhaustion had seeped not into the mud, but into the soul itself. This night was different. This night was not just the limit of war, but of humanity. The soldiers were silent. Even the wind had hushed itself as it swept over the camp. The fire had died, and the smoke had ceased to rise into the sky. Everything pointed to one thing. This was the last night of an emperor's endurance. Marcus wrote this sentence in his meditations notebook. It was the heaviest sentence he had ever written in his life. This sentence weighed heavily on Marcus, because for the first time, he realized he had lost the light within himself. The days of war, the endless rain, the lost soldiers, the camp collapsing due to the plague. All of it pierced his mind like nails. But tonight was different. Tonight, nothing made sense anymore. A man rushed into the tent. His face was as white as a sheet. "Sir, the northern unit has collapsed. The commander is dead. The barbarians are preparing for a night raid. They intend to destroy our northern army with a night raid." Marcus closed his eyes. This information was not about the fate of the war ... It was the kind that broke a man's patience. A single voice echoed in his head. You cannot stop the inevitable. That night, Marcus' mind was filled not with silence, but with darkness. Thoughts raced wildly, each one an accusation, a regret, a question. Should I have sent more soldiers? Did the plague camp take everything from us? Have the gods abandoned us? Was I not good enough? Am I responsible for all this? The weight of these questions, it was the kind that could bring an emperor to his knees. Marcus covered his face with his hands. He felt he had lost not the war, but himself. He collapsed not as an emperor, but as a man. He was powerless. He was broken. He was too exhausted to say anything. At that moment, he added this line to his journal. Today, my strength is gone. Today, knowledge was not enough. Today, patience died too. This was Marcus' rebellion against the God within himself. A group of soldiers entered, their faces bearing the news of death. They were no longer afraid. Fear had been replaced by something else. Despair. Sir, if they attack tomorrow morning, none of us will survive. These words suffocated the air inside the tent. Marcus raised his head. There was no rebellion in the soldier's eyes, no hope, only a void that accepted reality. And in the middle of that emptiness, Marcus, for the first time, couldn't say anything. Because talking that night wouldn't change reality. It wouldn't stop the end of the war, the approach of death, the breath of the plague. For the first time, it was a night when words were inadequate. Around midnight, a sentry came running. Sir, the enemy leader lit a fire on the mountain. This is a sign that we are attacking tomorrow morning. Marcus went outside. The sky did not thunder. The wind did not stir. The entire camp was silent as death. In the distance, a fire burned in the darkness. Behind the fire, barbarians stirred like shadows. Marcus stared at that light for a long time, without moving. And then he thought, maybe this is my last night. Thinking that sentence didn't kill him, but it changed him. When he returned to his tent, his soldiers were asleep. Some were covered in blood, some were wrapped in blankets, shivering. Marcus looked at each of their faces one by one. One of them woke up and whispered, Sir, are we going to die tomorrow? Marcus didn't answer, because that night there were no answers, only truths, and the truths were cruel. But at that very moment, the darkest thought inside him turned and revealed itself. Let go. Surrender. Don't fight tomorrow. This idea seized Marcus's soul for a moment. The emperor fell to his knees. The burden he had carried for years seemed to fall from his shoulders. And in that moment, he opened his meditations notebook once more. In trembling handwriting, he wrote, I have fallen, but I will rise again in the morning. Just before sunrise, the darkness reached its deepest point. The war tent seemed to collapse with Marcus's breath. But then a moment came. A faint light shone from outside the tent. It was not the sun. It was the faint glow of the campfire. Marcus looked at that light and whispered, Tonight, I forgot to be human. But tomorrow, I will fight remembering my humanity. Because dark nights break a man, but the courage to rise in the morning rebirths a man. That night, Marcus Aurelius did not surrender, but he did not cling to hope either. He simply did this. He stood his ground. Even in the darkest night, alone in the war tent, he stood amidst the wreckage of his own soul. And sometimes, for a Stoic, there is no greater victory than this.